Well, guys, it looks like Florida did it again, and in a good way. In one of their counties, they have decided to make the mask mandate unconstitutional, which is a great thing, honestly. Um, because mostly because the statistics that show with the masks and all this other stuff that's been happening and what the Democrats are trying to enforce onto people, which they're obviously succeeding in, um, doesn't really help equate to really the mass helping at all. You will see a lot of people going around with masks and trying to protect themselves, even though that the majority of the masks, especially the non-surgical masks, they're not actually helping prevent the virus. It's this illusion that the Democrats or the media that wants to put into your head that the masks actually really help anything. And they may help to maybe to some extent, but mostly it's going to be the surgical mask or specifically the N97 masks where they'll actually truly help. The other masks don't actually help at all, even the surgical mask, because if you think about it, the surgical mask is to prevent saliva or spit, whatever you want to call it, from going into the wound of the patient that you're in. It doesn't actually prevent any viruses that going in that's coming to prevent you from getting the virus. That is not necessarily what they're designed for. And on top of this is the virus is way able to go through the mask anyway. So unless you don't have an N97, it doesn't really help. This is the problem that I have with this is that these companies, or rather the Democrats, want you to wear this mask even though it's shown in science or in the statistics themselves that the masks don't actually help people, and that's the biggest problem that we have with these mask mandates, and the reason why I don't necessarily want to wear one, because there's no reason to it. It's not going to help me. It's not going to prevent me from getting it, because there's the science shows it does not. The stats don't actually show it. So the reason why the masks are really just insignificant, especially with the people, as I said before, if you're not wearing at least a surgical mask, like with the naturally what the nurses use, because the nurses use N97 masks, but at the very least, a surgical mask is not really going to help at all. And the people have these these own custom designed masks or whatever that is going to show like, oh, as long as you're coming in here and you have this mask, it's going to help. Well, it's not. And then in this article, with the great Florida themselves, get over here. What is happening? With the great Florida themselves, divided. Florida appeals court targets mask requirement, pointing to privacy rights. A divided state appeals court Friday overturned a circuit judge's decision last year that allowed Alachua County to keep in place a mask requirement to prevent the spread of COVID. Again, as I said, the masks don't really help. It's this illusion that the people thinking that they help, but they really don't. A panel of the First District Court of Appeal in a 2-1 decision said Alachua County Circuit Judge Donna Kim did not properly consider the privacy rights of plaintiff Justin Green before she rejected a request for a temporary injunction against the mask requirement. The trial court simply looked at the right asserted by Green to narrowly relying on the wrong privacy jury precedents, said the 13-page majority opinion written by Judge Adam. We're just going to go with Judge Adam. And joined by Judge Robert Long. The right to be let alone by government does exist in Florida as part of a privacy that our Florida Supreme Court has declared to be fundamental. The Supreme Court has constructed this fundamental right to be so broad as to include the complete freedom of a person to control his own body. Under this construction, a person reasonably can expect not to be forced by the government to put something on his own face against his will. Florida's constitutional right to privacy then necessarily is implicated by the nature of the county's mask mandate. The majority stopped short of declaring the Alachua County requirement unconstitutional, but sent the case back to the lower court of reconsideration. And honestly, do think most mask mandates are unconstitutional. Now, if you want to wear a mask and that's what you want to do and you do, then that's fine. I'm not saying people shouldn't wear masks or the fact that people should be shamed for wearing a mask. I'm not really saying that. What I am saying is that people should have the right to whether if they want to wear the mask or not wear the mask, and they should be able to make their own decisions on what they should do, especially according to the COVID. And if you want to get the jab, then that should also be up to you. I am highly against people being forced to get something that they don't that may not be considered for themselves, especially if their own doctors don't really recommend them getting it in the first place, because not everybody's different and it affects everybody differently. And then we're also going to say that it also gives heart inflammation, which I digress, will probably point people away from getting it because there's not been enough testing. Judge Joseph Lewis, in a 15-page dissent, has sharply criticized the majority decision, writing that a person's privacy right is not absolute. It's not going to be considered in isolation without regard for the circumstances under which the right is asserted. Wrong. A person's right is pretty much absolute. The only thing that would prevent a person from having any rights in general is if you committed a crime. And obviously, if you're inflicting harm upon other people with that said right, then that right can be revoked. But other than that, you have the right to pretty much do anything. As long as you're not harming other people, there's not really a problem. That's the reason why we have the First Amendment. So let's get these leftist people out of here. Honestly, the majority of the reason why I want these leftists out of my state is just, or not out of my state, but out of the country, is because they can just go to another place that suits them better and see how they actually have to feel it. Because the people that actually felt communism doesn't like it. As the trial court aptly stated, a person's right to be let alone is no more precious than his fellow citizens' right to become infected by him with a contagious, airborne, and potentially fatal virus, Lewis wrote. The mask mandate is no way an attempt by the government to control a person's body as found by the majority. The mask mandate is not compelled medical treatment, and the wearing of facial coverings does not alter one's physical person. Rather, the mask mandate is a temporary and de minimis interference with a person's public interactions in response to a global pandemic. Lewis also argued that the case is moot because Governor Ron DeSantis in early May issued an executive order that prevented Ellicott County and other local governments throughout the state from requiring masks. Yeah, and that's fine because people shouldn't be required to wear anything or use anything. That's not how that works. It's not how freedom works. If you want to force people to do something, then that's socialism/communism. So that being said, if you want to enforce socialism and communism onto people, then that's what's going to happen. Because you can't, by forcing people to do something, you're automatically creating communism in general. And Americans came to this country for freedom. And to avoid that side freedom, we have to keep that side freedom, we have to kick people out like these people, so that way we can have that freedom intact. Without it, then this country becomes communism, and then our country goes downhill, which it already is, thanks to, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, ruining the country. The effect of the majority step position led to the trial court's constitutional analysis of a non-existent order, Lewis wrote. The trial court could not grant appellants Green's request of relief of an injunction enjoining the county from enforcing the mask mandate contained in its emergency order because that order is no longer in effect, and so there's no enforcement to be enjoined. Oh boy. John and Long, who were appointed to the appeals court by DeSantis, disagreed that the case was moot, raising the possibility that Ellicott County could try to impose a mask requirement in the future. And yeah, that's exactly what they would do. They would, by the Democrats, rather the far left, just really want to impede on other people's rights because they like the power, they want to keep the power, so they're going to keep on doing it in the future. So to stop it out of the bud, and stop it in the bud, we will go to further measures to prevent it. The same thing we would have with preventing transgender people to be allowed to to compete in women's sports, because obviously there's a problem in it, right? Because if you allow it, it becomes a norm, and then you want to stomp, and to make sure that stomps out, you have to start it when it's early stages, so it doesn't continue to happen. And I do not want women's sports to be destroyed just because of that. Because we want to allow transgender people to be in, even though they're biologically male or female. Let's see here. Later in the opinion, however, the majority appeared to acknowledge that the circuit judge might not have a case to reconsider. Remand for a new proceeding that presumes the unconstitutionality of the mask mandate. In the event there are still some mask mandate that remains to be litigated, the opinion said. Alameda County, which required people to wear masks at businesses such as grocery stores and restaurants, was one of the numerous local governments across Florida to approve such mandates to try to curb COVID-19. Green, who operates a nursery business, took the lawsuit to the Tallahassee's Base Appeals Court after King refused to grant a temporary injunction in May 2020. Lawsuits also were filed against mask requirements in other parts of the state, with the 4th District Court of Appeal in January rejecting a challenge to Palm Beach County mandate. In the ruling Friday, John and Long relied heavily on a 2017 Florida Supreme Court decision blocking a law that sought to require women to wait 24 hours before having abortions. As we are told we must do, we will follow and expect trial courts to do the same. What the Supreme Court made quite clear, repeatedly in that case, the right of privacy as a fundamental one, expressly protected by the Florida Constitution, and any law that implicates it is presumptively unconstitutional, such that it must be subject to strict scrutiny and justified as the least restrictive means to serve a compelling government interest, John wrote. But Lewis, who was appointed to the appeals court by former Governor Jeb Bush, took issue with the majority's lines on the precedent from the abortion case. I'll be perfectly honest here, guys. If you're going to go for abortion, then you're actively trying to kill a life. Like, I will be making a video about this at some point, but initially speaking, you have every other avenue to prevent having a kid, and if you're not going to have that set requirement, not said to have that that responsibility, then you should be put in jail for killing someone. In my personal opinion, it would be irrational and downright repugnant to liken a woman's fundamental right to choose to end her pregnancy or unnecessary interference with that right, which is supposedly a deeply personal decision. I don't know why they even put it. We're going to end this here, because that has nothing to do with legitimately what the case is at hand. But yes, guys. Florida fighting back against these guys, against the masks and all that, and I think all states should. What they should do in general is not require a mask mandate, however, maybe recommend masks, but, at the end of the day, let the people do them. If people decide to wear masks, then they can. If they don't want to wear masks, that's on them too. We have to make more people, responsible for their actions. A lot of the things is that that the companies would do is that not censor things and stuff like that to make things better for people to have less accountability. I'll be honest here, guys. If you are a parent, and this is going a little bit off topic here, but if you're a parent, you should govern on what your kid watches and not have the government tell what to censor things or do whatever, because at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what your kid does and all that. And the same thing comes down to this. It's up to you whether you want to wear a mask, whether you want to get the jab or not, and that's entirely up to you. That's the power of freedom. That's the joy of freedom, and some things just have to stay the way it is. And, I'd much rather have freedom than have censorship or blocking any kind of freedom at all. That's it for the video, guys. Leave a comment, subscribe, and hopefully I can see you guys in the next video. Please tell me what your guys' thoughts on this case, and see you later.